Okay, I know what you're thinking. Why on earth are we exploring the 10 Commandments, not only for one Sunday, but for 10 Sundays? Isn't this story a fairy tale? And aren't the 10 Commandments a right-wing fundamentalist plot to get control of the government? Aren't we supposed to be religious liberals who believe in the 10 suggestions instead of the 10 Commandments? No, friends, we do not believe in the 10 suggestions. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm ethical codes in all the religions of the world. And I hope you recognize that in spite of the mythological origins of the Exodus story, and in spite of Alabama judges and others who wish to make the 10 Commandments mandatory, at least as they interpret them, these statements are the moral foundation of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The story, as Madeline so well told it, is a powerful one and one we need to understand. And it's one that is ingrained in most of us, isn't it? If not from Sunday school, then from Charlton Heston, who played Moses so well in the 10 Commandments that we assume that's exactly how the prophet looked and sounded, right? Remember when Heston, as Moses stood in flowing robes and long beard on top of Mount Sinai and said, "The only way you can take my guns from me is from my cold dead hand." Oops, wrong quote. But you get the idea, don't you? Or some of you with a more quirky imagination may visualize Moses as played by Mel Brooks in the History of the World Part 1. Remember that? Remember the bearded Mel Brooks descending from Mount Sinai, holding in his arms not 2, but 3 tablets of the covenant with 5 commandments inscribed on each. "Hear me, oh hear me, all pay heed," Moses proclaims. "The Lord has given unto you 15, and then one falls out of his arms and smashes on the ground, and he looks down and he mutters, "Oi!" And he says, "Oh, 10 commandments for all to obey." Aren't we lucky that we got knocked down from 15 to 10? The 10 Commandments are also called the Decalogue, meaning 10 statements. But why 10 and not 15 or 50? In actuality, the commandments were an abridged version of the Torah, which had an astounding 613 commandments. Far too many for anyone to remember or even to put on a courthouse door. So the 10 Commandments are a kind of Cliff Notes version. Rabbis Hillel and Akiva compressed the commandments even further when they summed up the entire Torah in just one commandment, and it is a good one. Do not do to another human being what you yourself would find hateful. The rest, as Hillel said, is but commentary. Later, Rabbi Jesus, with a little wordsmithing, followed their lead. Now, I imagine there are 10 commandments because, as Mel Brooks discovered, more than that are too difficult to hold in our hands and our hearts. And only 1 or 2 does not give us quite enough detail. As Will Rogers said, whoever wrote the 10 Commandments made them short. They may not always be kept, but they are understood. But lacking detail means that it's difficult to know exactly what the commandments mean. There are people who have no problem interpreting them for the rest of us, but for most of us, it's more complex than that. For instance, how should we interpret, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy"? To Orthodox Jews, it means you can't even turn a light on. And to some others of us, it might mean Sunday is a good day to watch football. In reality, the commandments didn't come from on high that I know of, unless you mean the high priest who most probably formed a committee. That's a scary thought, isn't it? You may have heard that a committee is a cul-de-sac down which ideas are lured and then quietly strangled. The commandments were certainly the result of negotiation and compromise between what the Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann called the holy people and the justice people. In fact, the entire Hebrew Bible was the result of this creative tension between those who believed the top priority of religion was to pay homage and give thanks to the Lord God, and to those who believe that our purpose is to live out the holy and acts of justice and compassion. Can you guess which tradition that we come from? You might notice that the commandments are split down the middle, with the first 5 being God-centered and the second 5 being more justice-centered, the perfect compromise. But let's face it, the commandments, as significant as they have been in our history, are a bit dated. They don't speak to our age as they have spoken to other ages. They're still good for a few zingers, like when President Reagan said, "I have wondered at times what the 10 Commandments would have looked like if Moses had run them through the U.S. Congress." But for most people today, they are irrelevant and invisible. So what do they say to us these 2,500 years later in such a different world? Or is it that different? Aren't we today seeking moral imperatives that will help us resist the temptations to punish ourselves and others? The first commandment is probably the most important because it states in unequivocal terms the identity of God. "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Do not have any other gods before me." Whoa! How do you really feel about that, God? That was a radical statement in a culture where polytheism was prevalent. People worshipped a wide variety of gods who were responsible for controlling different phenomena of nature. If a god came along that struck their fancy and gave them a little juice in the neighborhood, they would simply welcome it into their personal pantheon. This new God of the Hebrews could have suffered the same fate, becoming a demigod with little power or respect. But instead, he claimed to be the one and only, thus demoting every other god to a tinker toy. And his authority came from breaking into history to free the Hebrews from slavery. No small matter. And thus he gave the Hebrews an opportunity to enter into a covenant with him. An agreement that if they accepted him as their one true God, then he would essentially be their main man, preventing them from being enslaved and protecting them from annihilation.